All right, A pushers, welcome back to another episode of Mr. BAP US History, your source for notes and knowledge of all things A push. On today's episode, a democratic revolution, mass democracy, the spoils system, and the rise of the common man, 1800 to 1844. Mostly it's going to be focused on the presidency of Andrew Jackson. We start off today with a quote from his first inaugural address, March 4th, 1829. Some of the topics which shall engage my earliest attention as intimately connected with the prosperity of our beloved country are the liquidation of the national debt, the introduction and observance of the strictest economy and the disbursements of the government, a judicious tariff combined with the fostering of care of commerce and agriculture, and regulated by the principles before adverted to, a just respect for states' rights, and the maintenance of state sovereignty as the best check of the tendency to consolidation. On to the notes. The rise of popular politics, mass democracy, 1810 to 1828. The Democratic Revolution, the expansion of the franchise. The franchise means the right to vote. Universal adult white male suffrage. Suffrage also means the right to vote. So we have two new words for the right to vote, franchise and suffrage. And they're being expanded. Decline of the notables and the rise of political parties and the common man. Notables are the elite-run society that started in the colonial era. The political system of the new republic was dominated by these wealthy notables. These were northern landlords, slave-owning planters like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and seaport merchants like John Adams. Used their money to get people to vote for them, and their fame to get people to vote for them by either letting them borrow money or buying them alcohol in the form of rum. The rise of the democracy. After the revolution, Americans in the North and the West states began removing property qualifications for voting and running for office, resulting in the men of modest means or modest backgrounds winning elections. This was very contentious and often led to corruption or bribery. Political parties take command into this wild, wild west of new political systems. Political machines develop. Political machines are disciplined political parties run by a quote-unquote boss. This was exemplified and started by a person named Martin Van Buren, who was going to be vice president to Andrew Jackson in his second term. Van Buren argued that political parties are good for democracy. This is opposed to George Washington that said that political parties would divide the nation and were bad for democracy, as they were good because they checked the other parties' elected officials to prevent corruption. Political parties or political machines use patronage or appointing your supporters to political office as a way to get people to work for them. So instead of paying them using their money because they're not wealthy, they gave the reward of political jobs as a way to get people to get them elected. This became known as the spoil system, rewarding your political followers with government jobs. They also invented a thing called a caucus, a meeting of party leaders to determine who would be the best person to run for office. So it was very democratic instead of just like let's pick the rich and the famous. The election of 1824. After the War of 1812, the aristocratic notables of the Federalist Party disappeared. After and even during the era of good feelings, the Democratic Republican began to splinter into factions. This showed up in the election of 1824, where 5 candidates, all of them Democratic Republicans, ran for president. You had JQA, or John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams and successful Secretary of State to James Monroe, J.C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House and the creator of the American system, an economic plan that called the funding of internal improvements like roads and canals, which is called infrastructure, a high protective tariff, and to strengthen the second bank of the United States. Henry Clay was also the constructor of the Missouri Compromise, or the Compromise of 1820. Andrew Jackson was the second to the last. Andrew Jackson was running in 1824 as the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, represented a self-made man from humble origins, and another guy named Crawford. Because so many people were running for president, they were all Democratic Republicans, no candidate won a majority of the electoral votes, so the election was decided according to the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804 by the House of Representatives. Henry Clay, using his influence as Speaker of the House of Representatives, had JQA win the election. John Quincy Adams appointed Clay as the Secretary of State, a very influential appointment in his cabinet. Jackson's supporter called this a, quote, corrupt bargain, and vowed to win the next election. Jackson creates his own political party called the Democrats, dropping the Republican part and just keeping the Democrat part from the Democratic Republican Party. So they're Jacksonian Democrats. The last notable president, John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams established a national university in Washington, D.C. He sponsored scientific exploration of the West. He created uniform standards of weights and measures for the entire country and endorsed Henry Clay's American system as a federally funded internal improvements to facilitate commerce, high tariffs to protect American industries and stimulate manufacturing, and a national bank to control credit and provide a uniform currency. He also respected Native American land rights. All in all, not too bad of a president. Policies supported in the Northeast and the Midwest, but disliked in the South. It was opposed by Thomas Jefferson and other states' rights advocates who were against a quote-unquote consolidated government. Consolidated government is a powerful and potentially oppressive national government. States wanted to take Native American land, and so this made John Quincy Adams not very popular with a bunch of people. The tariff battle. The tariff became a way to get votes. The tariff of 1828 raised duties and taxes on raw materials, textiles, and iron by a lot, generating a lot of money for the government, but it was hated by the South because they didn't need it, but had to pay it because they sold cotton and then purchased manufactured goods, thereby funding the national government and funding the internal improvements that they didn't approve of in the first place. This was called, the tariff of 1828 was called by the South the tariff of abominations because they found it to be abominable. By the end of his presidency, John Quincy Adams was not very popular. The election of 1828, the democracy. Andrew Jackson, a.k.a. Old Hickory, calls his political party the Democrats and embraces Jefferson's ideals, celebrated popular rule and the common man. He was versing John Quincy Adams, who was running for a second term. He easily won the election, the first president from west of the Appalachian Mountains. Many notables fueled the rule of King Mob or mobocracy. The Jacksonian presidency, 1829 to 1837. Jacksonian presidency marks the emergence of an American-style democracy, which focused on a broad franchise, or everyone having the right to vote, political parties, and special interest groups, which we have pretty much to this very day. Jackson enhanced presidential authority, destroyed the mercantile nationalistic American system, and promoted a new ideology of limited government. This is a big change here as we go from mercantilistic and nationalistic American system to more classical liberalism or laissez-faire, which we'll have at the very end of these notes. Jackson's agenda. Jackson formed a kitchen cabinet on informal advisors to the president. He believed in rotation in office, aka the spoil system, which he rewarded his political followers with government positions. The positives to these new systems were new ideas, fresh faces, and more opportunities for the common man. The negatives, loss of expertise, inefficiency, and corruption. Jackson believed that Henry Clay's American system was unconstitutional. He proceeded to veto internal improvements, reduce tariffs, and ended the national bank. The Jacksonian presidents continued. The nullification crisis, 1832 to 1833. In response to the tariff of 1828, which was dubbed the Tariff of Abominations, South Carolina called a state convention and issued an ordinance of nullification. They declared the tariff to be null and void and threatened secession if federal officials tried to collect the tariff. Secession, that means leaving, like breaking away from the Union, starting their own country. Nullification, argument that a state has the right to void a law passed by Congress. This argument was supported by none other than J.C. Calhoun, who was Jackson's current vice president, who wrote the nullification order secretly. It reflected arguments made by Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of 1798 that were written to oppose the Alien and Sedition Acts that was passed by John Adams' administration. These both espoused the compact theory of government, which was sovereignty lay in the states, not the people. States' rights interpretation of the Constitution. Since states created or ratified the Constitution, states could destroy or nullify the Constitution. Andrew Jackson responds with the Military Force Bill of 1833. He threatens the secessionists with treason and death. Works with Henry Clay in the meantime to create the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which gradually lowers the tariffs to pre-1816 levels. The crisis averted for now. No civil war just yet. Way to go, Henry Clay. The Bank War, the Second Bank of the United States, 1816 to 1836. Privately owned, but with a 20-year charter from the federal government, it stabilized the nation's money supply by providing hard money or specie gold and silver coins, backing their printed paper money with these specie coins, keeping inflation down. The bank president was Nicholas Biddle. Biddle was convinced by Henry Clay to seek an early extension of the bank's charter in 1832 as an election thing because Henry Clay was running for president, and so they made the bank an issue. Jackson vetoed the charter, claiming that it favored the rich and was against the common man, and it was unconstitutional. Jackson wins the election of 1832, defeating Henry Clay. The Treasury Department then transfers the federal government's gold and silver out of the national bank into various state banks. These state banks became known as pet banks because they were favored by the federal government. Without any money, the national bank ceases to exist. Jackson effectively kills the national bank. This action was probably unconstitutional, but Jackson claims that his re-election represented the decision of the people, aka a mandate. Clay accuses Jackson of being a tyrant and doing whatever he wants. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. The common man, quote unquote, wanted the Native Americans resettled west of the Mississippi so as to steal their land. Most natives did not want to leave their ancestral land. For example, the Cherokee, one of the 5, quote unquote, civilized tribes, wanted to integrate or assimilate into American life. They had learned how to speak English. They had created their own written language. They had written a constitution. They owned businesses, and they were farmers. In Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, the Supreme Court rules that Cherokees have the right to stay. Jackson passes the Indian Removal Act and forces them to move anyway. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 created quote-unquote Indian Territory in what is present-day Oklahoma. They promised money and reserve land forever and ever and ever. Chief Black Hawk and the Sauk and the Fox Indians fight for their land in the Midwest. Jackson sent the U.S. Army and in the Bad Axe Massacre killed most of his warriors, effectively forcing them to move west of the Mississippi River. The Cherokees were rounded up by the U.S. military and forced to march from Georgia to Oklahoma. Thousands died on the way. This became known as the Trail of Tears in 1838. Seminoles in Florida were the only Native Americans that were able to resist location, mostly by hiding in the swamps of Florida. The Jacksonian Impact. Jackson expanded the power of the president by claiming to be a direct representative of the people, upheld national authority with the threat of force, and reinvigorated a tradition of limited and frugal central government. The Taney Court. Jackson appoints Roger B. Taney as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's going to be almost as influential as... No, he's not. Not as influential as John Marshall, but still very influential, as he's the Supreme Court, head of the Supreme Court from 1835 all the way to 1864, which is close to the end of the Civil War. Taney supported Jackson's states' rights and free enterprise interpretation of the Constitution. States have the right to promote the general welfare, not the national government. The states revised their constitution to make them more democratic. The country embraces classical liberalism or laissez-faire government, which is limiting the national government's role in the economy, just letting things happen. These were a lot of notes today. I hope you appreciated them and learned a lot. Like, subscribe, make sure you add some comments if you appreciate all the hard work that was put into this. Until next time, this is Mr. B, AP US History. Let's go, A-Pushers. Let's go.